providing structure, providing a scaffold within which the students can take risks and be inventive and creative with the language.
I think that's true, and I mean, I think though as well, I want to hark back a bit to the point that I made earlier about how important it is during these activities that the teacher is experienced or aware enough or knowledgeable enough to make those choices, because a lot of the activities you're going to get, because they are, they're generally pretty free. Some are focused, I think, but still the range and variety of language that can come out of them, I think, is pretty wide. So I do think as well that the ability for the teacher to make appropriate choices of that emergent language is pretty key. So that's my opinion anyway. And I think that that leads me to my question that I have for you then, is how much of a role do you think DogMe has on like initial teacher training courses?
Well, this is a good question. This is something in fact, in my institution here, my international house in Barcelona, where I've worked, where many of the ideas were formulated. We run pre-service courses for teachers, and we run in-service courses. And I admit that a lot of my ideas, a lot of the dogma kind of approach developed out of working with in-service teachers, and a certain disappointment in the fact that a lot of these teachers who have been teaching for some considerable time still depended heavily on materials at the expense of creating these spaces that I've been talking about. But I've also been involved then subsequently in working on pre-service courses and doing sessions with teachers who've never taught or never taught English before. And in fact, what was interesting was that, in fact, these teachers on these pre-service courses with no experience of teaching English were more receptive to the notion of a kind of hands-off approach than the more experienced teachers. In other words, the more experienced teachers seem to have built up a kind of dependency, if you like, or an addiction even to materials, whereas these new teachers were saying, yeah, well, I mean, that's how I learned Spanish, or that's how I learned to draw or to drive or whatever. I just got in there and did it, and somebody kind of pushed me and pulled me in the right direction. And also, I think a lot of these the new teachers were struggling with trying to make sense on their initial training courses of some of the kind of textbooks that they were being asked to use, and couldn't see how they were remotely relevant to the needs of the students that they were teaching. And so when I came along and said, well, actually, you have permission from time to time, try it out, to step away from the textbooks and just work with the kind of natural language that emerges out of the discussions in the classroom. They said, wow, yeah, that absolutely makes sense. So I don't think, because actually what we're not talking about very sophisticated skills here. We're talking about very basic human social skills of talking to people, listening to people, and giving them feedback. And we do that in our daily life constantly. And sometimes in the classroom, we become so experienced and so professional, if you like, so expert, that we stop. We don't stop, but we park the natural social side of language learning in favor of the kind of more academic mechanical side of language.
I think that's true. Yes, I can understand that. I mean, I think, are you talking, I kind of see you talking about two different things, though, and I could be mistaken, but there's the idea that newer teachers are certainly more able to embrace this approach, so they don't have that resistance, or they don't have, as you said, they're not kind of so conditioned to be dependent upon materials. But are they still effective in the way, not just being able to notice the language or notice the errors that students are making, but do they have that at least some kind of background where they're able to do the clarification of the errors? So, this is right, this is wrong, and then the students say, but why?
Absolutely right. But I mean, even the new teachers, however they're teaching, even the teaching with a course book, don't have that ability. It's something that you develop through trial and error. But I mean, the sooner you develop it, the better. And in a sense, the dogma approach is like a deep end, like we're going to throw you in the deep end, and you better bloody well develop those language analysis skills now, because you need them. You can't wait. So, yeah.
Actually, that's true.
So maybe we'll just weed out the people who really shouldn't be doing
really
it at all.
Separate the sheep from the goats, exactly.
And actually,
but I'm being a little bit frivolous here. I don't deny that the problems involved, and I don't deny the problems involved for so-called non-native speaker teachers of English too, who may feel slightly less confident as being able to provide the kind of authority when they give feedback on language that just emerges out of classroom discussions.
Yeah.
But then you see the non-native speaker teachers have the enormous resource of having been there and done it themselves, and in a sense they're actually better off at anticipating and dealing with the kind of errors and problems that their students are making. So it sort of swings and roundabouts basically, but experience is the great teacher, and you can't, there's no shortcut to experience. But I think if you go through life being dependent on textbooks, you will never, I mean, after all, I mean, the number of times I've talked to teachers on workshops and going around, and people said, yeah, actually, you know what, the best lesson I ever taught was that lesson I went in one day when the photocopier wasn't working and I just had to ping it, or the power went off and we had to do it in the dark, or I missed the bus and I arrived late and I didn't have time to, etc. And people say, when you're running on empty, when you're forced back on your own resources, sometimes those are the best lessons, and you realize what resources you have and how you can exploit the students' resources at the same time. And, unless you have that experience, unless you're plunged into it in a sense, it may take a very long time to realize that very, very satisfactory, in fact, more than satisfactory teaching can occur simply working with the raw material of what is offered by the people in the room.
True. Okay, we have, I think maybe this might be our last question, just because I know that it's quite late where you are, so thank you so much for staying up to time. You must be, the sandwich wasn't enough.
The sandwich didn't last. No, it wasn't enough, I'm telling you.
Okay, we've got one more question, and it's about standardization. I think it's quite an important question. So, for example, in a school where there's, multiple levels of, say, an intermediate level, and each one of those courses has a standardizing quiz or test, and you've got two teachers teaching in two different styles. What about that situation? How do you still maintain a level of standardization depending on how the teachers teach?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we've